In 1814, Europe finally beat Napoleon Bonaparte and captured him, and his punishment was becoming an emperor. Yeah, you heard that right. The guy who conquered half the continent, who scared kings so badly they built entire coalitions just to stop him, Europe finally corners him, finally wins, and their big punishment is, congratulations, you're still an emperor, just smaller. I'm not exaggerating for effect here. This is the actual deal they signed. And Napoleon didn't just accept it, he took it dead seriously, built himself a tiny army, redesigned a flag, and then used all of it to walk back into France and take the whole country back without firing a single shot. So stick around, because by the end of this, you're going to understand how the safest punishment in European history accidentally became a training montage. It's spring of 1814. Napoleon has just lost. And I don't mean he lost a battle, took an L, regrouped, came back stronger. No, this is the real thing. 20 years of conquest, gone. His armies are shattered. Paris has fallen. And somewhere in Europe, a bunch of kings, emperors, and assorted royal guys with excellent posture are sitting around a table trying to figure out one very awkward question. What do you actually do with a guy like this? Because look, the obvious answer is right there. Execute him. Nobody in that room is losing sleep over the man who tried to invade half their countries. But here's the actual problem, and it's the kind of problem that only exists because Napoleon was annoyingly good at his job. He isn't just some general. To a huge chunk of France, this guy is a legend, an artillery officer from a nothing family on Corsica who clawed his way up to literally crowning himself emperor. You do not get to kill a guy like that and just walk away clean. Kill him, and he doesn't disappear, he becomes a story. And stories get more dangerous every single year somebody keeps telling them. So, instead of a firing squad, the coalition does something almost funnier. They sit down and negotiate with him, like this is a business merger and not the aftermath of a continent-wide war. And the deal they land on, the Treaty of Fontainebleau, might be one of the strangest documents ever signed in European history. Napoleon keeps the title of emperor. He gets full legal sovereignty over the Island of Elba, a stretch of Italian coastline you could walk end to end in a day. He gets to bring 600 of his own soldiers as a personal guard, and, this is my favorite detail, he gets an annual salary paid to him by France. The country he just spent a decade at war with is now cutting him a check. Sit with that for a second. The plan to humiliate Napoleon Bonaparte was to let him keep his own private army, his emperor title, and a government paycheck, and just quietly shrink the map underneath him. Europe genuinely believed they'd clipped his wings. What they'd actually done was hand him a stage so small that nobody was paying attention to it anymore, which, if you know literally anything about how Napoleon operated his entire career, is exactly the kind of gap he built empires out of. Now, if you got demoted from ruler of most of Europe to guy in charge of one tiny island, you'd probably spend your days sulking on a beach, right? Maybe writing an angry memoir, maybe just staring at the water, feeling sorry for yourself. That is not remotely what happened. Napoleon lands on Elba in May of 1814 and does something almost unhinged in its intensity. He takes the job dead seriously, like suspiciously seriously. Let's talk scale for a second because it matters. Elba is small enough that you could fit it inside the city of London about 7 times over. This is not a territory that requires a royal court, an infrastructure plan, and a rebranding campaign. This is a rock with some vineyards on it. But nobody explained that memo to Napoleon. Or if they did, he simply chose not to read it, because within weeks, he's acting exactly like a man who just inherited another continent. He personally designs a brand new flag for the island, red stripe, 3 golden bees, because apparently even in exile, the man had strong opinions about branding. He gets hands-on with agriculture, teaching locals better bread making and farming techniques, presumably because a man used to commanding 500,000 troops now had a genuinely alarming amount of free time. He commissions an actual hospital. He starts laying out roads and water systems like Elba is a growth stage empire and not a glorified fishing village. And then, because apparently redesigning flags and giving out bread tips wasn't quite emperor enough for him, he builds himself a military. 600 soldiers, 100 horses, a navy that consists of essentially one working ship, dramatically named the Inconstant, which, in hindsight, might be the single most accidentally honest boat name in recorded history. And in one of those details that sounds completely made up but genuinely isn't, his personal supply inventory on the island reportedly listed exactly 1 brick. This is a man who 5 years ago was moving armies across the length of an entire continent, now personally micromanaging a military you could fit inside a high school gym with room to spare. But here's the thing you need to hold on to, because it's the engine of this entire story. Napoleon wasn't doing any of this because he'd lost the plot. He was doing it because deep down, he was never actually retired. He was rehearsing. Because here's what nobody in that negotiating room seemed to think all the way through. If you let a man who has spent his entire adult life building empires keep even a tiny sliver of real, legitimate power, he is not going to just sit still with it. He's going to use it exactly like he's used every scrap of power before it, as a foundation. And by early 1815, less than a year into his island exile, Napoleon decided the foundation was finally ready to build on. Back on the mainland, France was quietly falling apart. The king the coalition installed in his place, Louis XVIII, was deeply unpopular. The economy was rough, the old aristocracy was clawing back privileges nobody had missed, and a growing number of French citizens were starting to look back at the Napoleon years with a kind of nostalgia that should have terrified literally everyone. Meanwhile, over at the Congress of Vienna, the exact same monarchs who had exiled him were busy throwing lavish parties and slowly hashing out his permanent fate, so distracted that the British officer specifically assigned to keep an eye on Napoleon wasn't even on the island the week it mattered most. Genuinely, he picked possibly the worst week in European history to take a trip. Napoleon, watching all of this from his tiny kingdom with his 1 ship and his 1 brick, somehow reads the moment perfectly. And in February of 1815, he does something that should sound completely deranged on paper. He loads his 600 soldiers and 100 horses onto that single ship, his entire navy, and sets sail for the coast of France. Let's actually do the math here. France, at this exact moment, has a population of roughly 30 million people, a full standing royal army, border patrols, the works, and Napoleon is arriving with about 600 guys on 1 boat, having quietly slipped past British naval ships that were, in theory, watching for exactly this. If you pitched this plot to a studio, they'd throw you out of the building for being unrealistic. Because when word reaches Paris that Napoleon has landed, King Louis doesn't sit around wondering what to do. He sends an actual army to intercept him, with very explicit orders to stop this obviously doomed little invasion before it goes anywhere near the capital. Leading part of that army is a marshal named Michel Ney, a former loyal commander of Napoleon's own, who publicly promises the king he'll drag the emperor back to Paris in an iron cage. Great line, bold promise. On paper, this entire situation should be over within a matter of days. The two sides finally meet near a town called Grenoble, lined up on a narrow road, and Napoleon's ragtag 600 are standing there, badly outnumbered, facing down a full royal regiment sent specifically to end this. And Napoleon does something that by every normal rule of warfare should absolutely not have worked. He walks forward, completely alone, unarmed, steps out in front of his own men, straight toward the line of soldiers who've been ordered to stop him. He opens his coat, exposing his chest, and basically says, "If any soldier here wants to shoot his emperor, here I am, do it now." Nobody fires. Instead, the soldiers break formation and start cheering his name. And this doesn't happen just once. It happens over and over as he marches north toward Paris, one army after another sent specifically to stop him, instead tearing off their royalist colors and falling in line behind him, like he never left. Even Marshal Ney, the guy who publicly promised an iron cage, ends up switching sides completely and joining him with his own troops. By the time Napoleon actually reaches Paris, King Louis has already fled the country in the middle of the night, and Napoleon simply walks back into his own palace like he'd just stepped out for a long lunch. A man who left the mainland with 600 soldiers and 1 brick had just retaken an empire of 30 million people, and he hadn't needed to fire a single shot to do it. Europe's plan to humble Napoleon worked perfectly. They thought shrinking his empire would shrink the man. Turns out all Napoleon needed was just 1 island, a brick, and a running start. The rest is history. If this one messed with your head, hit like and subscribe, and there's another one just like it waiting for you on screen right now. Click the video and I'll see you there.